Hello, so here we are, the last day of The Wild Robot. When I first started reading, I thought, oh, am I ever going to finish this? Because it's such a long book. But here we are. So remember, Roz is just a torso and a head. No legs and arms. She needs her son and her friends to help get her back to her nest. The title of this chapter, it's chapter 77, is The Meeting. Strong, nimble creatures carried Roz up the sea cliffs and across the island. They carefully propped her up inside the nest. They built a fire, and then they left the robot with her son. Roz and Brightbill sat there staring at the flames until the goose finally said, "Do you need anything, Ma?" "I could really use some new arms and legs." The robot chuckled at her own bad joke. "That isn't funny," cried the goose. "My mother is broken, and I don't know what to do about it." "I am sorry for joking." Roz adjusted her voice to a more serious tone. "I know you want to fix me, but there is nothing anyone here can do." At these words, her son looked away. "Brightbill, I am afraid we have some difficult decisions to make. I think you should arrange a meeting of our closest friends. We could use their advice." The goose disappeared out the door, and soon Roz's oldest and wisest friends were on their way. Loudwing was the first to arrive. She limped into the lodge on her injured foot and sat close to her friend. Mr. Beaver appeared next, followed by Fink and Swooper. Then Tawny curled up on the floor. Mother Bear was too badly hurt to make the journey, so Nettle came in her place. She sat in the garden with her enormous head jutting in through the doorway. Brightbill returned with Chit-Chat, who was nursing her burned tail. The last one to crawl in was Crag, the old turtle. Once everyone was there, the meeting began. The group talked all through the night. They discussed the Reccos. They discussed what to do about Roz. They discussed how to keep the island safe. There were stark differences of opinion, and tempers flared. But by daybreak, the group had agreed to a plan of action. That morning, the dawn truce didn't take place in the great meadow. Instead, it took place in a small meadow by the foot of the mountain in front of the airship. Weary animals quietly hobbled into the clearing. The only sounds came from a gurgling brook that wound through the gathering and right past our robot. Roz sat in the wet grass. She was leaning against a rock. She looked so sad and frail. However, she still had her thoughts and her words, and for the moment, that was all she needed. "Good morning, animals of the island." Roz's voice filled the meadow. "I must look strange to you, all beaten up like this, but I hope I still sound like your old friend." Hundreds of heads nodded. "You fought bravely yesterday. You risked your lives defending me, and I am eternally grateful. But many of our friends were wounded. Some may not recover, and there is worse news. Before the last Recco died, he told me that more of his kind will come to our island. They might already be on the move. And even if we defeat them, still more will come. My makers will not rest until all of their property has been retrieved. They want the dead robots. They want the broken parts. They want me." The crowd was silent. "But I care about this island far too much to put any more lives in danger. And so, my friends, I must leave." Voices cried out, "Don't go, Roz! Next time we'll be prepared. We risked our lives so you could stay." "I hear you." The robot's voice cut through the din. "But look at me. My body is ruined." And the Recco said, "The only ones who can help me are my makers." "What if he lied?" howled a voice. "You can't trust those monsters." "You are right," said Roz. "He might have been lying. There may be no hope for me, but that is a chance I have to take. Animals, you taught me to be wild. I want to be wild again. And so I must try to get the repairs I need. It is for the good of me and the island that I return to my makers." A calm settled over the crowd. They knew Roz was right. Chapter 78. The Farewell. Our robot had an army of animals at her command, and she asked them to bring every robot part and rifle back to the airship. Absolutely everything had to go, was the only way to be sure that the Rekkos would never come back. The island animals had no trouble locating the remains of the dead robots. Retrieving those remains took a bit more effort, but they were up to the challenge. Teams of clever creatures returned with robot parts of different shapes and sizes. Smashed heads and broken rifles and twisted tubes and heavy bodies were all loaded into the ship until the entire island had been cleared. Even the tiniest scraps were collected. It's amazing what an army of animals can do. A light mist was falling when they finally heaved Roz through the ship's doorway. Her head slowly turned around to face the crowd of geese and beavers and owls and insects and foxes and raccoons and vultures and moose and bears and opossums and fish and deer and otters and turtles and woodpeckers and squirrels and frogs and hares and on and on. Every animal on the island had come to give the robot a proper send-off. "Goodbye, you wild animals!" Roz's voice echoed through the gray mist. The wild animals smiled, and then a few of them started to roar. Then more started to screech, and then more started howling and chirping and grunting. Soon, every creature was hollering goodbye to Roz. The chorus of wild voices grew louder and louder, shaking the robot's body, rattling the ship, booming across the island and up into the clouds. And then their voices gradually died down to silence. Bright Bill fluttered up to his mother's shoulder. "You understand why I must leave," said the robot. "I understand," sniffled the goose. "More Rekkos could be headed here right now. I just don't know. There is so much I don't know. I think it is time I get some answers." Will I ever see you again?" Bright Bill, wiping his eyes. "You are my son, and this is my home," said Roz. "I will do everything in my power to return." Bright Bill hugged his mother's worn face. "I love you, Mama." "I love you, son." The goose fluttered back to his flock. The robot took one last look at her home. The door hummed closed. So here is Bright Bill saying goodbye. Chapter 79. The Departure. So that's what it looks like. There's the island, and here's Roz flying off. The Departure. The airship's engines automatically fired up. Then the ship slowly floated above the island, turned to the south, and disappeared into the clouds. Chapter 80. The Sky. Our story ends in the sky, where a robot was being whisked away from the only home she had ever known. As Roz sat in the airship, broken and alone, and speeding toward a mysterious future, she looked back at her miraculous past. Reader, it must seem impossible that our robot could have changed so much. Maybe the Rekkos were right. Maybe Roz really was defective, and some glitch in her programming had caused her to accidentally become a wild robot. Or maybe Roz was designed to think and learn and change. She had simply done those things better than anyone could have imagined. However it happened, Roz felt lucky to have lived such an amazing life, and every moment had been recorded in her computer brain. Even her earliest memories were perfectly clear. She could still see the sun shining through the gash in her crate. She could still hear the waves crashing against the shore. She could still smell the salt water and the pine trees. Would she ever see and hear and smell those things again? Would she ever again climb a mountain or build a lodge or play with a goose? Not just a goose, a son. Bright Bill had been Roz's son from the moment she picked up his egg. She had saved him from certain death, and then he had saved her. He was the reason Roz had lived so well for so long, and if she wanted to continue living, if she wanted to be wild again, she needed to be with her family and friends on her island. So, as Roz raced through the sky, she began computing a plan. She would get the repairs she needed. She would escape from her new life. she would find her way back home. And that is the end of the story. So I do want to, there's a little note about the story from the author, so I'm going to read that too. So Roz is off to her to get repaired. A note about the story. This is from the author. I've always been fascinated by robots, by the real robots that exist today, by the robots that will exist in the future, and by the fantastic robot characters that exist only in books and films. It's funny how many philosophical questions spring up when we think about artificial beings. Do we want robots that can think and feel like a person? Would we trust robots to perform surgery, care for children, or police our cities? In a world where robots did all the work, how would we humans spend our time? I'm also fascinated by the natural world. I grew up exploring the fields and streams and forests near my home, and I learned a lot about the local wildlife. I knew that deer were most active at dawn and dusk. I watched squirrels methodically collecting and storing acorns. I heard geese honking overhead as they flew south every autumn. Animals have such predictable behavior and follow such rigid routines that at times they seem almost robotic. And somewhere along the line, it occurred to me that animal instincts are kind of like computer programs. Thanks to their instincts, animals automatically run from danger, build nests, and stay close to their families. And they often do these things without thinking, as if they've been programmed to perform specific actions at specific times. Surprisingly, wild animals and robots actually have some things in common. These kinds of thoughts have filled my imagination for most of my life. And then a few years ago, I started scribbling down words about a robot and some wild animals. I couldn't stop doodling pictures of a robot in a tree. I started asking myself odd questions. What would an intelligent robot do if she were stranded in the wilderness? How might she adapt to the environment? How might the environment adapt to her? Why am I referring to the robot with words like she and her? And for that matter, why have so many science fiction writers given genders to so many of their robot characters? An image of a robot named Roz was slowly forming in my mind. I could see her exploring a remote island. I could hear her communicating with wild animals. I could feel her becoming part of the wilderness. And after years of imagining and writing and drawing, I realized I had all the ingredients for a robot nature story. So I drove out to the cabin in the woods, opened a fresh notebook, and began working on the wild robot. So a little history of how this story began. And you will be excited to know that there is another book, The Wild Robot Escapes. So I'm going to read a little bit of that as a teaser. So if you can get this book from the library or from Amazon, maybe you want to read it this summer. Chapter 1, The City. Our story begins in a city with buildings and streets and bridges and parks. Humans were strolling, automobiles were driving, airships were flying, robots were hard at work. Weaving through the city streets was a delivery truck. The truck knew where to go and how to get there all by itself. It pulled up to a construction site and automatically unloaded some crates. A few more turns and it unloaded more crates down at the docks. The truck zigged and zagged across the city, delivering crates as it went, and then it merged onto a highway. Cars and buses and trucks were cruising along the highway together, but as the delivery truck continued, the traffic became lighter, the buildings became smaller, and the landscape became greener. With nothing but open road ahead, the truck accelerated to its top speed. The landscape outside was now just a green blur, occasionally broken by a flicker of gray as a town flew past. On and on the delivery truck went, racing over long bridges, shooting through mountain tunnels, gliding down straight stretches of highway, until it started to slow. It drifted from the fast lane to the exit lane, and then it rolled down a ramp and into farm country. Clouds of dust billowed up behind the truck as it drove past fields and fences. In the hazy distance, enormous barns loomed above the plains. The air was thick with the smells of soil and livestock. Robot crews methodically worked the crops and fed the animals and operated the massive farm machines. A hill gradually climbed into view. The hill was crowned with trees and white buildings. Another farm, but this one was smaller and shabbier than the rest. Out front was a crooked sign that read Hilltop Farm. Wheels crunched on gravel as the delivery truck rolled onto the driveway and up to the top of the hill. It stopped beside the front porch of the farmhouse and dropped its last crate to the ground. Then the truck drove away. Reader, can you guess what was tightly packed inside the crate? If you guessed a robot, you're correct. But this was no ordinary robot. It was Rosm Unit 7134. You might remember her old life on a remote, wild island. Well, Roz's new life was just about to begin. So I hope some of you will read The Wild Robot Escapes. I hope you enjoyed the story.